Even the happiest of marriages can sometimes veer sharply toward disillusionment. What starts as trust and companionship can, over time, find itself clouded by shadows of doubt and betrayal. I never imagined that I would find myself questioning the foundation of my own marriage, but betrayal has a way of seeping into the cracks we pretend not to notice. Grace and I had been married for 5 years. In that time, we had built a life together that, on the surface, appeared stable and ordinary. We bought a modest home, stretching our combined salaries to cover the mortgage. The dream was simple: pay off the house before starting a family. It felt practical, even responsible, given our income. Grace worked at the local job center, which meant she often came home earlier than I did. My position at a project management firm kept me late most nights, as last-minute assignments and client demands piled up. I convinced myself that the long hours were necessary, a sacrifice for our future. One evening, after another exhausting day, I arrived home to find Grace already in the kitchen. The smell of dinner filled the house, and she greeted me with a warm, albeit tired, smile. I hung my coat by the door and tossed my keys onto the counter. That's when I noticed something unusual. Grace's keys, lying beside mine, had a new addition. A shiny, heart-shaped keychain dangled from her ring, catching the light in a way that made it impossible to ignore. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The surface was smooth, polished, and oddly heavier than it looked. As I examined it, my thumb brushed over a small, almost imperceptible button along the edge. I pressed it without thinking. The heart split open, revealing a tiny compartment inside. Inscribed in delicate cursive were the words, "To my beloved, remember me." For a moment, I simply stared at the message, unsure of what to make of it. A gift, maybe, but from who? Grace had never mentioned buying herself anything like this. The message felt intimate in a way that made my chest tighten. I walked into the kitchen, the keychain still in hand. "Hey, Grace," I began, keeping my voice as even as possible. "What's this keychain on your keys all about?" She glanced over her shoulder, her expression softening. "Oh, that? It's just a keychain." "Why?" Her answer was casual, too casual, like she had rehearsed it. I held it up, gently prying open the heart to reveal the inscription inside. It has a message. "To my beloved." Care to explain that part? For a split second, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe even guilt, but it vanished just as quickly. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she crossed her arms. "It means exactly what it says. I bought it myself, if you must know. A little treat. You haven't exactly been showering me with surprises lately, have you?" Her voice carried an edge, as if she were trying to shift the blame onto me. I stayed silent, watching her carefully. "Look," she sighed, reaching out to take the keychain from my hand. "I wanted something special, something just for me. I thought a personalized inscription would make it feel, I don't know, meaningful." Her gaze dropped to the floor, and after a moment, tears welled in her eyes. I shouldn't have to explain every little thing, should I? Her vulnerability tugged at something deep inside me. Had I been neglecting her? The thought gnawed at me. It was true that I had been consumed by work, and maybe I hadn't been the most attentive husband. I stepped closer, wrapping my arms around her as she silently wept against my chest. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean to upset you." The next day, I left work early for the first time in months. I picked up a bouquet of flowers and a pair of silver earrings. Small gestures, but ones I hope would show Grace how much she meant to me. Her face lit up when I surprised her, and for a while, the strange keychain drifted from my thoughts. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. A few weeks later, an ordinary day at work took a turn I wasn't prepared for. In our office, we had a colleague named Hudson. Colleague might have been a generous term, considering he rarely did any actual work. Hudson had married the daughter of a high-ranking official, and his father-in-law had pulled strings to secure him a cushy job at our firm under the pretense of gaining experience. He spent more time golfing than working, and when he did show up, he left early without explanation. Management tolerated it, unwilling to challenge someone with connections. That evening, as I passed by Hudson's empty desk, something caught my attention. His keys had been left behind, carelessly abandoned on the surface. There, hanging from his keyring, was a heart-shaped keychain, identical to the one I had found on Grace's keys. My breath hitched. I hesitated for a long moment, staring at the small object as if it might disappear if I blinked. Slowly, I reached out, pressing the tiny button just as I had done before. The heart split open with a faint click. To my beloved, remember me. The same inscription, the exact same words. My hands trembled as I placed the keychain back onto Hudson's desk. The pieces began to fall into place, each one heavier than the last. The late nights, the keychain, the tears. Had I been so blind? I stood there, frozen, as the truth settled over me like a suffocating weight. Some betrayals are loud and shattering. Others creep in quietly, hidden behind familiar smiles and tender lies. The key was identical to Grace's, down to the inscription. Then I noticed one of the keys on Hudson's ring looked a lot like my apartment key. A reckless thought flashed through my mind. I swapped one of my keys with his and placed the bundle back on his desk. When Hudson returned later to grab his things, he didn't seem to notice the switch. That evening, my suspicions got the better of me. I slid Hudson's key into my apartment lock and click. It turned effortlessly. My pulse quickened as I opened the door. Scattered in the hallway were belongings that didn't belong to me or Grace. Among them were Hudson's shoes and a jacket. The unmistakable signs of intimacy were everywhere, leading straight to the bedroom. I couldn't bring myself to confront them. Instead, I quietly gathered up all of Hudson's possessions, down to his underwear, and stepped back outside. Sitting in my car, I tried to collect myself, anger and heartbreak swirling inside me. Minutes later, Hudson dashed out of the building, wailing in my shorts and t-shirt. The sight was absurd, almost laughable, but I didn't stick around. I drove straight to Hudson's house, where his wife answered the door calmly. I handed over his things and told her where I had found them. Unsurprisingly, Hudson's marriage didn't survive the month. He was promptly fired, his father-in-law's connections unable to save him from the scandal. As for Grace, her explanation was as cold as it was crushing. Well, I got tired of the monotony while you were stuck at work. Hudson and I weren't just fooling around. We were going to restaurants and living life. Her words stung worse than the betrayal itself. Hudson's ex-wife wasn't about to let things slide. Determined to settle the score, she used her connections to strike back at Grace. With a bit of persuasion, her influential father reached out to Grace's boss, urging them to terminate her employment in a way that would tarnish her professional reputation. Not long after, a disciplinary case was launched against Grace. The accusations piled up, and soon enough, she was handed a work record so damaging it made finding another job nearly impossible. Now, Grace's life looks very different. She works in delivery, grinding away 12-hour shifts 7 days a week just to scrape by. As for us, our marriage didn't survive. We divorced, but the shared weight of the mortgage lingers like an unwelcome guest, forcing us to figure out a way to untangle that financial mess. It's a strange place to be, a strange yet tethered by obligations neither of us can ignore.